The Bible tells us that the Antichrist will be the ruler of Russia. Now, the Antichrist is a man who takes over the world and rules the world. But when I say he is the ruler of Russia, I mean he starts off as the ruler of Russia, and then he takes over the world. He uses the Russian military power in order to take over the world. He makes war against the Christian countries and defeats them, and that's how he gains power over every nation. That's from Revelation 13, verse 7. Just how does the Bible tell us that the Antichrist will be the ruler of Russia? Well, first of all, one Bible passage says the purpose of the second coming is to destroy the Antichrist. Actually, he's called the Wicked One. This is from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 7 and 8. But a second Bible passage tells us that the purpose of the second coming is to defeat the invasion of Israel, led by the Antichrist. The invasion is led by the Antichrist. Finally, a third Bible passage tells us that it's about the same invasion of Israel, but this time it gives us the name of the country that leads the invasion, and it gives us the name of the ruler. So if we combine all three passages, we come up with the idea that we can identify who the Antichrist is. Okay, let me read from all three passages. Let me quote the particular verses. Okay, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 7 and 8 reads like this. For the mystery of iniquity doth already work, only he who now will let until he be taken out of the way. This means he prevents or he restrains until he's taken out of the way. Verse 8 then says, Then shall the wicked one be revealed, whom the Lord will consume with the spirit of his mouth, and will destroy with the brightness of his coming. The coming here would refer to the second coming, and so the purpose clearly is to defeat and destroy this wicked one, which is simply another name for the Antichrist. Okay, now on to the second passage, which is Zechariah 14, verses 1 through 4. Actually, verse 2 says, I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. In other words, there'll be an invasion of Israel, which will focus on or concentrate on Jerusalem. Then in verse 3, it says, the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations. And then in verse 4, it says his feet will be upon the Mount of Olives, which is east of Jerusalem. And so why is this automatically or necessarily the second coming of Christ? Well, Christ left the world from the Mount of Olives. In Acts 1, it says that the disciples saw Christ ascend. And then it says they left that site, or that location, and went back to Jerusalem. And it says they left from the Mount of Olives. So it's saying that Christ ascended from the Mount of Olives. But the angel said that he will return in like manner, which can be taken to mean he will return to the Mount of Olives. So in Zechariah 14, when it says God will stand upon the Mount of Olives, or more accurately, he'll be above the Mount of Olives in the sky. When it says he will come to the Mount of Olives, it has to be the second coming. So here we have the context of the second coming. The context is presented as the invasion of Israel. So we have to combine 2 Thessalonians with Zechariah 14. Now, like I said, the implication is that the invasion of Israel will be led by the Antichrist, or will be commanded by the Antichrist. He will be in charge. He'll have generals invading, but he's responsible for the invasion. And so if Christ defeats the invasion, he will also defeat the leader of the invasion. And so I'm trying to say the leader of the invasion should be the man that Christ defeats, that he destroys. Going by, I'm referring back to 2 Thessalonians. But interestingly, although Zechariah 14 does make clear that God, when it says God or the Lord, it's talking about Christ, but it doesn't make clear who is leading the invasion. Now we have to go to a parallel passage, which is the third passage in this video, which is Ezekiel 38 and 39. The invasion of Israel there is the same thing. It's the same invasion. And there's only one invasion of Israel in the end time. You have these preachers like Hal Lindsey says there's two invasions. No. There's no Bible passage that has one invasion followed by another. Each Bible passage about the invasion of Israel in the end time gives you only one invasion. So we should try to use that as a basis for saying that the invasion of Israel in the end time in Ezekiel equals the invasion of Israel in the end time in Zechariah 14. Now, in Ezekiel 38 and 39, the nation that leads the invasion is clearly identified as Russia. And the leader of Russia is called Gog, which is a partial glimpse. If you take the letters of Gog, it's a glimpse of the word Gorbachev, because Gorbachev starts off with G-O, just like Gog is G-O, G-O-G. And Gog is not a Russian name, so it's clearly not. We clearly can't say that's the name. It has to be taken as a hint of the real name, the true name, and like I say, it's a fraction of the name, the first part of the name. Let me go over. Let me clarify something. I said that in Ezekiel 38 and 39, the nation that is leading the invasion is clearly Russia. Well, that's not really. It's not really clear that it's Russia, but it is definitely Russia. It says Magog, and that's to the far north. Now, far north points to Russia, because Russia is the nation furthest north. There's no nation further north than Russia. And Moscow is directly north of Israel. Um, and well, Ezekiel gives more description than just the name Magog. It says that Gog will be the prince of Rosh, and two other names, and two other cities or areas. And Rosh is basically synonymous with the name that became Russia. Before Russia became Russia, it was called Rosh or Rus. Long story short, if we take Ros as a place name, then it does amount to evidence for Russia. Okay, some more evidence for Russia is Josephus said that Magog, Josephus was a first century historian, and he says, and he's quite authoritative, he says that Magog is the Scythians, refers to the Scythians. And the Scythians were an ancient nomadic tribe that roamed throughout Russia. So right there, the Scythians is synonymous with Russia. And there's a fourth reason for Russia as Magog. It says in Ezekiel that Magog will be a ringleader nation. There'll be many follower nations that participate in the invasion of Israel, led by Magog. Now, Russia fits the description of a ringleader nation. There are many nations that follow in Russia's train, in Russia's wake, I guess you could say. But clearly, if you're looking for a ringleader nation, Russia is your choice. Okay, that basically sums up what I wanted to say, the evidence I wanted to give, that Russia is the nation that the Antichrist will rule, and through which he will take over the world by making war against the saints, which is what Revelation 13:7 says. There it says another term for the Antichrist is the beast. And in Revelation 13:7 it says the beast will make war against the saints, which would mean the Christians. In other words, the nations predominantly Christian. And it says that the beast will overcome them. That means he will defeat those nations. And it's talking about Europe in particular, but by extension it's also talking about America, because if Russia takes Europe, they have to knock off the defender of Europe, which is, of course, America. We're the leader of NATO. We're married to Europe through NATO. And so an extension of what I've been saying so far is that if Russia takes Europe, they have to bomb America. And so that's the implication of what I've said so far, that the Antichrist will be the ruler of Russia. Russia is the only nation, it's going back to Revelation 13:7 again, Russia is the only nation that can fulfill Revelation 13:7, besides the United States. We could take over the world by making war against Christian nations, but of course we're one of the nations meant in that term of the saints. And so you have to dismiss America as a candidate for that role, which leaves Russia as the only nation that fits. But there is this passage, Daniel 7, verse 8, that says the Antichrist will rule Europe. He will be called the beast. And to explain Daniel 7, verse 8, well, we have to start off with Daniel 7, verse 7, where it's talking about the fourth beast, which is talking about the Roman Empire, the ancient Roman Empire. And then it jumps over to time when the Roman Empire is gone. There are 10 nations that become independent nations, 10 areas of the Roman Empire that become 10 sovereign nations, and then they're invaded by an outside nation. And the invader takes over, and those nations lose their sovereignty. So it's a return to one-man rule, which was the case in the time of ancient Roman Empire. And so that's the return of the empire, simply the conquest of Europe by Russia. And in Daniel 7, verse 8, it says that in order for me to explain Daniel 7, verse 8, I have to resort to using Revelation 17, verse 8 through 11. There it clearly says the beast exists, and then it does not exist, and then it exists again. It comes a second time. Now, we use this as a way of interpreting, going back to Daniel 7, verse 8, verse 7 and 8, and seeing that there are three distinct periods. Verse 7 is the ancient Roman Empire, and then in verse 8, where it says there's 10 horns, those are 10 nations that have become independent after the fall of the Roman Empire. And then the conquest by the 11th horn, called the little horn. He comes up among the 10 horns. This is talking about coming up from outside, convert the horns to nations, and then you have the action of one nation coming up among the 10. And this would be invasion. And this would be the third period. This would be the return of the beast, which is simply talking about the return of one-man rule over the geography of the nations that made up the Roman Empire. Now, what I'm trying to deal with is the fact that the word beast refers to the geography, the empire, but it also refers to the little horn, who is talking about a king. It says he has the eyes of a man, and he speaks, he boasts great things. The idea is the conqueror of Europe is called the beast, at the same time that the term beast refers to the geography that he conquers, and that he restores the so-called restoration of the Roman Empire. Anyway, long story short, when it says the beast in Revelation 13:7 will make war, it's talking about the man who conquers Europe, and therefore he becomes the beast ruler, the ruler of the Roman Empire, the return of the Roman Empire. And so the term beast refers to the man and to the empire that he rules. And it's the return of the empire rather than the real Roman Empire. It won't be Roman because Rome gets bombed by Russia. And Rome is eliminated. That's in Revelation 18, verse 10, verse 17, and verse 19. It says 3 times that Babylon gets destroyed in a single hour. It's talking about Rome, because Rome is a term, a code word for Babylon is a code word for Rome. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 13, at the very end of that book, it says, the church that is at Babylon, elected together with you, salutes you. This is Peter ending the letter. He's saying, I salute you, but it says the church at Babylon. Now, Peter was at Rome, but he's using the term Babylon for Rome. So that's the basis for my contention that Babylon over in Revelation, Revelation 18, is talking about Rome. And Rome will be destroyed, so the return of the Roman Empire won't actually be Roman. And so the so-called return of the empire is a return of the likeness of the empire. A likeness in the sense that it'll be one man ruling over the whole territory, just like the Caesars, the ancient Caesars, ruled over all of Europe. That's all for now. And please send comments. I'm sorry that I was not able to be more streamlined in this video. I'm going to make a transcript and put it in the description box under the video, like I usually do. One more thing. As far as the time of the Russian invasion of Europe and the bombing of America, which would be the time of the Rapture, the people being killed, the Christians among those people, they would be raptured to heaven. And now the Rapture, the time of the Rapture, in Revelation 14, it speaks about the rapture in verse 14. It says, Christ will have a sickle, and he will harvest the earth. But the thing that's interesting, in this same chapter, in the very beginning of the chapter, it speaks about 144,000 people in Israel, the 12 tribes of Israel. And this is a way of God giving us a clue as to the time of the rapture. Now, these 144,000, I believe it's talking about Jewish Christians in Israel. Do you know that at this point, in this year, there are already 144,000 Jews in Israel that are Christians? So on that basis, I can tell you today, I contend today that this year will be the year of the rapture, which means it's the year of the Russian attack on America, and it's also the year of the Russian invasion of Europe. I'm saying that to people in Europe in particular. If you're in Europe, I would advise you to move away from Europe so you can escape the Russian occupation of your country. And I would say Australia would be a good place to visit. And you can always move back to Europe after the 5 months of the tribulation are over. 5 months is given in Revelation 9, verse 5 and 10. Christ speaks about a day that will come like a snare upon the whole world, catching the world by surprise. Now, a snare refers to a trap that catches an animal that does not recognize the trap as a trap. And he's talking about the day of the Russian attack on America and invasion of Europe. And now at the same setting, Christ, he's talking about the tribulation is part of the things that precede his coming. He's giving them, he's answering their question about the sign of your coming. And part of that, he goes into the labor pains. And with labor pains, the contractions are a certain distance apart, and then they get closer and closer. And then there's the birth right after the last labor pain, let's say. If the labor pains refers to different crises occurring, wars and pestilence and so on. Now, if this present crisis of the COVID pandemic, if this is the last labor pain, the implication is that the birth would come right after that. Now, the birth in this scenario is talking about the coming of the tribulation, which is also coming of the Russian rulership over the world through Russia making war. And a long story short, what I'm trying to say is, it could very well be that when this pandemic is over and the world opens up again, which would be, like, say, the start of June, then right after that would mean as close as the end of June. And I'm expecting the Russian attack could happen. It's not necessarily happening on this day, but it could happen on June the 26th, because that is a day that God wants to turn into make synonymous with judgment, because it's a day that the U.S. Supreme Court legalized gay marriage. God wants to tarnish gay marriage, and one way to do it would be to have this attack, Russian attack, happen on the very day, a very anniversary of the legalization, the abomination that happened on that day. The legalization was an abomination. And that's all I want to say. We'll see what happens.